Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Absolutely delighted to be telling you about Vermont's Climate Superfund bill that passed last year. So, just a little bit of a background on how this bill came to be. You may have heard that Vermont had historic flooding across the state. Montpelier was, it was inundated above basements into the first floor for a lot of buildings. I'd even say well into the first floor for a lot of buildings. And then the erosional damage that we saw as rivers decided to change their course was significant. So we had an estimate that it was about $1 million in damages that year. And so going into the last year's session, flooding was on everybody's mind. We were all coming up with ways that we could address the pain that was caused by that flooding. And there were a suite of bills actually that were in response to that, including looking at flood safety, how we were going to be preventing that kind of thing in the future, looking at abatements for properties that were damaged and owed the state money, et cetera. And so this was just one of them. It's worth noting that when we were coming up with Vermont's version of the bill, I have to give credit where it's due. New York went before us. They had actually started the process before our bill got started. And so we looked at their bill and used that as an inspiration. We had to modify it in some ways because Vermont doesn't have any coastline. So some of the impacts were a little bit different. And that ended up going through the process a little bit more quickly than our than New York's bill. So even though they started before us, our process was completed before theirs was. A little bit of background, something that was in a lot of legislators' minds as we went into this bill about a climate superfund was this situation that happened with St. Gobain in Bennington County, which is down south in Vermont for us. St. Gobain was a manufacturer of PFAS, and there was, as a result, a lot of contaminated groundwater, and Vermont ended up holding them accountable for the damage that they caused. There were examples of how St. Gobain had to connect homes that were impacted by PFAS in the groundwater. They had to connect those homes to the local municipal water infrastructure so that they didn't have to rely on their wells anymore. And so that was in a lot of people's minds as we went forward. Here was an example of a company that was acting legally, but as a result of their product and the damage from their product, they were held liable for that damage that they caused. And so as a logical leap for us going to climate, we said the products from these oil industries are damaging all of our businesses and homes, and we deserve to be compensated for that damage that these products have caused. And so it was helpful to have that background for some legislators to have an anchor into the logic of how this would work. And then just in terms of process, we also worked really hard ahead of this session to ensure that a lot of the senators going in were supportive of it. So we actually had a veto-proof majority that signed on as co-sponsors ahead of the legislative session. We did have a veto-proof majority in both the House and the Senate at the time, but it turned out that that was not quite as important as it might otherwise be because the governor let it, who is a Republican, let it go into law without his signature. So he did not veto it. But again, just in terms of Vermont's path, we had our local public interest research group, VPIRG, launch a campaign. It was a coalition of local environmental groups, but they were a key player there. So there was a Make Big Oil Pay campaign launch that started the summer before the flood. Actually, in gosh, I guess it was 23. But so yeah, just before the big flooding took place. Then that historic flooding happened, somewhat ironically. It started out in our Judiciary Committee, and that mainly because this was about liability, and it never actually went into the possession of the Natural Resources and Energy Committee in the Senate. We did get a drive-by, as they say, but we just so that we could be informed about it, but we never had possession of the bill. And then in the end, even after it went through both the House and the Senate, it did have tripartisan support. I would say bipartisan, but we actually have Judiciary Committee voted in favor of it as well. So that was very encouraging. And I think as I mentioned, it went into law without the governor's signature, so he did not ultimately veto it. But I think that was really reflective of the fact that so many of our constituents at the time were hurting financially from the impacts of the flooding that we had just experienced. And the conversation in Vermont at the time was not, was this a result of climate change? It was obvious that it was a result, and the conversation was really about, that this is the new normal. It's just going to happen again because of climate change, and so how do we prepare for this new future that is going to be hotter and wetter, and what are we doing to prepare for that? And in this case, how are we preparing for that financially? So thinking about the damage that we had experienced. And are likely to continue to experience from the historic emissions that have already happened. And so then thinking about the future, where are we headed with Vermont's Climate Superfund now? So this legislative session, there has been the need to continue to fund aspects of this as it rolls out. So we do have some funding for it in our budget this year. It turns out that there was a little bit more modeling that needed to be done. So we've funded the modeling. As particularly Vermont has a very mountainous terrain, and we wanted to model erosional damage. And then there was, as I'm sure many of you are aware, there was an executive order that came out from the White House. And specifically, Vermont got called out. And I'll tell you, when I heard that, I was like, "Yeah, all right, we made it. We're in there." And in part, that is because I see that as a sign that the oil industry is scared, that they know that they're liable, and that it's really just a matter of time before they are held liable, and they were enlisting the help of the White House at this point. And we do know that there has already been a challenge brought to it in court. That was fully expected, and so our Attorney General was a part of the process leading up to the passage of the bill, and so she is ready and willing to defend it. And so, as with so many things, we're so grateful for our Attorney General, who is standing up to the White House in other regards, but in this regard, we're absolutely just so grateful to have her defending this law, which we see as absolutely legal. So that is sort of the overview, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen here if I can. Okay, so that's sort of big picture, the story of where we are and how we got there, and happy to take any questions at the end.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful, and I appreciate your background and perspective on the issue and having worked really hard to get that passed in Vermont. We've already got some questions coming in that we'll get to at the end of the webinar. Again, if you do have a question, feel free to um, send a message to Amy or Ezra. Um, Next, I'd like to introduce a fellow colleague of mine, Sean Mahoney, who is the Vice President for Maine and Senior Counsel at the Conservation Law Foundation, CLF. Sean's organization worked on the language for the Vermont law, and Sean is here to speak to the legal precedent of the Climate Superfunds and the mechanics of how it will work in Maine. So I'm going to pass it over to Sean, and I am going to share my screen for his slides. So give me 1 second.
Thanks, Ezra. Thanks, Jackson, as we're waiting for the share screen. Um, I first just want to say or echo the thanks to Senator Watson and her colleagues in Vermont um, because it was the first. We like to say Maine is dear ago we lead, but Vermont definitely took the lead on this approach to dealing with the damage from fossil fuel use over the last 2 centuries. And that was a pretty quick, speedy tour through a lot of work that was done both in and outside the legislature to make it successful, and it has made it a lot easier for other states now because Vermont and then New York went, and the concept of Climate Superfund bill is much more readily understood. Um, so, in short, this is really this concept of polluter pays, which has been around since the federal government cleaned up Love Canal in New York back in the late 70s. And that is, if you make a mess, you clean it up. And in the circular, the hazardous waste superfund, that applied to any generator or person who stored or used or created hazardous waste. If their waste got into the environment, they were on the hook for cleaning it up. And so that's the basic, principle of the Climate Superfund bill. It's not that much more complicated. And in the Climate Superfund piece, the big difference is that because you don't have one specific piece of property like the facility in Vermont for Saint-Gobain that was contaminating groundwater, we've got damage that is diffuse throughout our states and our region, our country, our world. So how do you identify who the responsible parties are, and how do you identify the damage? Those are the two big things that have to be done. And there's two ways to do it. One, you can, in Vermont, the administration is charged with determining what is the dollar value of damage associated with climate. And there is a lot of very good data um, and methodology to identify that, both at the federal level with the EPA, at least for now, until it disappears under the new administration, as well as with private sector can help with that. Vermont is doing an analysis of what that looks like. New York took the approach and just said, what we're going to say is we're going to say that the damage attributed to climate change over the next 25 years is $75 billion. And so for the next 25 years, there's a $3 billion pot of damages that we are going to allocate to the responsible parties. And so that gets to the next piece that we have to, that is required for this to work, which is how do you identify and then allocate who's responsible. And again, that too is, although opponents are going to say it's very complicated, it's relatively straightforward. We're looking at a period of time, and there's some difference between Vermont and New York and what's being proposed in Maine, but we're really talking about the last 2 or 3 decades, 25 or 30 years. And we look at the volume of fossil fuels that have been refined or extracted or produced that can be tied to each of the states. So there has to be a connection of the product coming to the state, coming in as gasoline, as fuel oil, as um, to power plants, etc. And so it's not a huge universe of entities. And once you identify that, then you are using the volumes of what has been sent to the state, whether it's Vermont or Maine or New York, and you use that as a means of divvying up responsibility for the costs associated with it. So, um, there will be a lot of talk about how complicated it is, but there's a lot of um, um, very good hard science behind establishing what the number is for the damage and the responsibility for the parties. So those are the two principal parts of the statute. And the in Maine, we just had signed into law LD1, which was the governor's bill, got bipartisan support in the legislature, which provides over the next 2 years, $22 million to Maine residents to prepare for and respond to storm damage. And storm damage that, unsaid in the bill, it stems from climate change. We think that, the Climate Superfund, and that money is coming from taxpayers. The Climate Superfund would enhance that with far greater funds that come from the responsible parties over the next 25 years. So there's some real simplicity to it. Obviously, the big oil and the big gas companies are going to challenge it, as they have in Vermont and New York, and they're going to fight those. The other piece I would just note with respect to the Maine Climate Superfund bill, it's also very consistent with the action of our Attorney General as well, Attorney General Frey, who has joined in with other attorneys general in bringing a lawsuit against the oil companies for their essentially their climate deception over the last 5 decades, and looking to hold them responsible for that. So there is some real synergy with some of the other things that are happening at the state level. Jackson, I forget what the other slide was. I think I've covered most of this one.
Yeah, it was just these two slides.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're in the process as far as the legislative process, there are actually two bills looking to establish the Climate Superfund program and the Climate Superfund fund. And they'll probably get merged into one. There hasn't been a public hearing as yet. And for those who are on this call, and for the more than 100 who were on a prior call in the month, we'll be making sure that people know when that public hearing is, because as Senator Watson noted, having a lot of public support for this is going to be important, particularly in a year when budgets are tight. And even though there's not a big fiscal note to this, there will be costs to the agencies associated with it. So why don't I stop there, and I too would be happy to answer questions at the end.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sean, for providing kind of the legal precedent behind it. I want to also introduce now Griffin Sinclair-Wingate. He is the Climate Organizing Hub Campaign Manager at Climate Defenders. He's one of our fellow organizers for the Maine Climate Superfund bill. So Griffin's going to talk to us about kind of like a national perspective, where else climate superfunds have passed, have been introduced, and what it might take to pass a climate superfund here in the state, what kind of organizing efforts would be needed to pass it here in Maine. So Griffin, I will hand it over to you.
Cool. Thanks so much, Jackson. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Lovely. All right, cool. Well, hey everyone. As I said, my name is Griffin. I work at Climate Defenders, which operates nationally, but I'm actually based here in Portland, Maine. Super quick background on Climate Defenders. Pretty new organization. Our goal is to end the fossil fuel industry and support the folks who are on the front lines of the climate crisis. In the past few years, we've really focused on like swarming to moments where we feel like we can really deliver serious blows to the fossil fuel industry. So we were one of the key conveners of the March to End Fossil Fuels back in New York in fall of 2023. It was the largest climate mobilization post-COVID and mobilized 70,000 people in the streets. We also believe that direct action and civil disobedience are a key part of what is needed in this moment of crisis that we're living in, especially these days. And so we organized this wave of actions calling on the financiers of fossil fuels to stop funding this crisis, to stop funding fossil fuel companies. That was very much the predecessor to what our work was last summer, which was the Summer of Heat campaign. We organized 3 months of sustained civil disobedience on Wall Street, targeting some of the largest financiers of fossil fuels in the world. And now we are directing our attention to make polluters pay. In the fall, we helped with a sit-in and helped kind of push the New York bill past the finish line. And it really just the more we learned about it, it became clear that this was an incredibly strategic campaign that could deliver serious blows to the fossil fuel industry and build a lot of support through wide swaths of the public. And so that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit is how this campaign can build public support. And I'm going to go over some data that we're really lucky to have on Make Polluters Pay that really underpins the different like values and beliefs of people that we can talk about to help further this legislation. Data. Okay, so most people believe and know that the fossil fuel industry lied to us about climate change and that they should be held somewhat accountable for paying for the damages. And this is, not just across, this is across Republicans and Democrats and independents. There is broad consensus on this. People are concerned about how we're going to deal with the consequences of climate change, especially when you ask them about like FEMA funding and disaster preparedness. People know that we don't have enough money to adequately respond to the crises and the disasters that we're going to be facing in the coming years. 70%, 77% of voters, including 77% of independents, 65% of Republicans are worried that FEMA disaster relief won't be enough to help impacted communities. They also know that these fossil fuel companies, they're loaded. They have so much money. They have had some of the most profitable years in their entire existence in the past decade. And all this while consumers are facing the cost of rising energy, right? Everyone's talking about how much it costs to heat their home, to pay their electricity bills. And they're also seeing that these fossil fuel companies, these oil companies are making money hand over fist. So it makes a ton of sense that folks are like, okay, we should have the polluters chip in, use some of their, billions and billions of dollars to help clean up the mess that they caused and lied to us about. And this is, again, across wide swaths of the public, both Democrats, Republicans, and independents. This is all these groups think pretty favorably on this idea. I get to work with some really incredible people on this campaign, some people who've been organizing the climate movement for decades, and they all talk about this campaign in a really unique way where they haven't seen this level of public support for another climate campaign in the work that they've been doing. So I think that we have a real opportunity here, not just to like build the climate movement and like further the narrative on Make Polluters Pay, but zooming out to really like build the broader progressive movement here, and to bring people who are frustrated by big corporations hoarding wealth and hoarding money into our vision of the future where we are safe from the climate crisis. People are on our side. We just need to organize them. How do we do that? What do we do? There's a whole suite of tactics that groups across the country are using to town resolutions. This is already underway here in Maine. Y'all been working on town resolutions. Folks are doing this in Massachusetts as well. Really great way to talk with people in towns about what they would use this money for. There's some really great stories coming out in Massachusetts around folks talking with the wastewater treatment facilities manager being like, well, yeah, it's really hard for this facility to function when there's huge floods. If this bill passed, we could do X, Y, and Z with the revenue, which would really help our town be able to manage stormwater in a more environmentally friendly way, and also in a way that protects businesses from getting flooded. Anyway, town resolutions, town halls and community events. The folks over in New Jersey this week and next week are doing town halls all across their state where they're talking with individuals about what climate superfunds are, why they're so important, and how they can plug in. One-on-one conversations, right? Y'all know this. This is super important. We got to talk with people about this idea. It's kind of it's not that popular yet, but I think it's going to be really, really popular. I think that make polluters pay is going to be as common as a household phrase as like Green New Deal was in 2019, maybe even more. And we need to do these in mass, right? Climate Organizing Hub and a ton of the other groups on this call, we have the tools to contact hundreds of people through phone banking and text banking and canvassing, but we need help to do that. So we'd love to connect with y'all if that's something you're interested in. And then lastly, sharing stories, talk with the legislators, the people who have to vote on this. The folks out in California who have Make Polluters Pay legislation have been killing it. They have an incredible organizing apparatus they've built out there where they're connecting business owners and individuals and organizations and all kinds of different groups of people with legislators to not just make the case for climate superfunds from an environmental perspective, but from a business perspective, from a taxpayer perspective. I think there's some pretty serious inroads to be made here with Republicans, with working class people, when we narrow in on the messaging that like, if polluters aren't paying for this, like we are, like a flood comes and washes out a bridge, the bridge needs to get replaced. And it's either going to happen through taxpayers in that town or it can happen through a climate superfund, and we can have the multi-billion-dollar corporations that cause the problem pay for it. And it's their mess to clean up to begin with. Yeah, so really resonant messaging here, and a really powerful campaign, and the work that y'all have been doing in Maine has been really awesome. I think Maine has a really good shot at passing this, and it's really exciting to get to support it. Yeah, that's what I got for you. Happy to answer questions. I'm also going to drop a link in the chat if folks want to get plugged in, if they want to text bank, or they want to just have a conversation, or they want to maybe start working on a town resolution in their town. I'd love to help you out with that, to get you connected to the right folks. And I will drop that link in the chat right now. And I'm seeing a question about a petition. I will also go dig up the petition and drop that in the chat too. Just give me a minute. Back to you, Jackson.
Thanks, Griffin. Really appreciate the energy you bring, and thanks for all your work. After this webinar or tomorrow, we'll also be sending a follow-up email to everyone who registered. That'll include a recording of this webinar, as well as some information, resources, how to stay involved, as well as the petition that Griffin just mentioned. So we'll now kind of jump into our Q&A portion of the webinar. We've got some good questions, and we actually got one about the California Climate Superfund bill. So maybe Griffin, if you want to try to answer this. Someone in the chat said that California has dropped their Climate Superfund bill. Is that true? And if so, how come? Any perspective on that?
Is the person in the chat talking about the hearing that happened several hours ago in California?
I'm not sure. But if oh, go for it.
I raised that question. I saw it in the news maybe a few days ago.
No, there was a hearing this afternoon on it. I haven't gotten the results of the vote yet. There's a chance it could have been voted down. It was looking, like it was going to be a tough hearing. But I'm not sure what you read. I have seen some posts that talked about last year's Climate Superfund bill in California, which did not make it through. But this year, as far as I know, at least as of yesterday, the bill was still moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Last week, it passed out of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, I think with a 9-4 vote. So it was moving forward, as far as I know. Bill.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Griffin. Daniel, do you have a question?
I do, not on the California question, but if I may, I have actually two quick comments and a question. The comments are, I'm glad that Griffin mentioned briefly the impact of such a bill and such a law on the fossil fuel companies themselves, because ultimately the shift is only going to happen if they feel economic pressure. There's going to be economic incentives and disincentives on all fronts, but this is one more tool to hit them where they hurt, which is in the pocketbook. So that's good. The other comment is regarding lawsuits, and people have pushed back. Well, if we pass this, it'll just get challenged in court. Great, because during discovery and during evidentiary hearings, the truth will come out about how long and how much they've been lying to the country. So it's great that a lawsuit will be brought, because then the public will learn the truth. My question is maybe both to Senator Watson and Sean Mahoney. Most of the Superfund bills so far have focused largely, if not entirely, on damage to the infrastructure of the state. However, there's a huge, huge health cost toll that the state has to bear as a result of the pollution that's produced by burning fossil fuels. If you think about kids on main care who show up in the ER with their third asthma attack, of the month, or somebody with chronic Lyme, or people with diabetes who are in decay because the power went down and they couldn't store their insulin properly, so forth, on and on. These costs are being borne by the state as well as the infrastructure costs. Is there any, or first of all, was there thought given in the Vermont bill to including the health costs? And secondly, do we know if there's any thought being given to including the health costs in the Maine bill? And sorry I went on so long.
Thank you for that question. My recollection is that it does include some provisions about health impacts and costs associated with it. I mean, we tried to take a holistic, or as holistic as we could, perspective on the costs that would be incurred in the state of Vermont as a result of climate change. And so that, to my recollection, is one of them. But I want to make a side comment, which is not exactly what you asked about. So this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think it is important that, particularly because these kinds of things are likely to end up in litigation, I think it's important that people are clear about how we talk about them. Like, just as an example, so in Vermont, we have another lawsuit about, the fact that the oil industry lied, and that was, there's a consumer protection issue there around lying about their product, and that, making sure that, just being clear that you're not straying into, and I don't think I've seen anybody do this, but that, we're not trying to regulate emission, like air emissions. Do you know what I mean? This is about the damage caused by the product, which is extraction and refinement from these products. So and, and the use of these products. So I just want to flag that. But I'm sure Sean,
Yeah, I mean,
probably has more thoughts about that.
well, again, we're doing a lot of flattering of Vermont because we're copying a lot of what they did. But there is, Daniel, a lot of room in how the funds can be used so that they are consistent with Maine's climate action plan, which has a significant portion of it, which talks about the public health impacts of the climate damage. There's the department under the statute is to come up with an implementation plan, and part of that plan is also to include consultation with other state agencies, including the Department of Health and Human Services. And there's also provision for a percentage of the fund to be spent on low income and environmental justice communities, so to benefit those communities that are bearing the brunt in many cases of this. So it's an excellent point, and it's one that I think will be helpful in convincing people if this isn't just about culverts and hardening shore and those types of things, but are also about how do we deal with the impacts on people.
Great, thank you. Because there's good data showing that the health
Absolutely.
message is the one that the public and the media and policymakers respond to most of all when they're starting to think about, if their kids are going to get sick from, breathing this stuff,
Right.
or the next storm or whatever it is. Great, thank you. I appreciate that. The attribution is going to be the difficult part, it seems to me. But
Right. And yes.
So thanks for the question, Daniel. That was a good one. I want to move to a couple of questions we've had in the chat. So this one is, what kinds of catastrophes count when it comes to what we make big oil pay for? How big do the storms need to be? And how do we measure or decide whether a storm comes from climate change or not? So I'll open that to all of our panelists if one of you want to go for it.
I'm happy to jump in here. That's a great question, and that the heart of this, the idea of a climate superfund is based on the something called attribution science, which is the statistical science of how much stronger storms are now relative to what they would be in the absence of climate change. And so there's some scientific algorithms, statistical determinations to make that determination. So, I guess I'd point you in that direction.
I'd build on that. There was an article that just was published in the journal Nature, led by a professor from Dartmouth, I believe, that talks about this that looks at attribution and walks through why it's eminently doable. In this case, in the case of, Climate Superfund. I'd also quote the former Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell, who, when asked for a definition of pornography, said, "I know it when I see it." And I think that the Climate Superfund bills provide that flexibility of knowing it when you see it. So it's not, part of this is it's not just in response to the severe weather and the severe storms that we're experiencing. It's also about preparing for them. And it's also about repairing the damage that's already been done for some of these things. So there is room for that. In the instance of Maine, the Department of Environmental Protection is the agency that is responsible for it, but it works within the plan set by our Climate Council and by the legislature.
Great, thank you both. And I saw that Bill raised his hand if you want to ask a question.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jackson. I guess my biggest concern is identifying the responsible party. I worked on a number of CERCLA sites, and we usually had records, documentation tying a particular manufacturer to a spill. And I think, Sean, what you said was that you would hold responsible the parties that bring the product into the state. And is that true? Or I thought that's what you said.
It's not just the party, it's the party whose product is used in the state. So if Mobil, Exxon, and there are thresholds as well. You have to have a certain amount of emissions before you even get qualified. So, for example, in Maine, Downeast Energy is not going to be a responsible party. Shell Oil will be. ExxonMobil will be. Irving Oil will be. Sprague Energy is likely to be. So what we're talking about are those who are extracting, refining, or producing the fuels used in the state that cause the climate damage. Go ahead.
In the case of coal burning power plants in the Midwest, we're not bringing any coal as appreciable amounts into probably New England at this point. But being at the end of the tailpipe, so to speak, they're certainly contributing to our problems.
I think that's right. That one could be a little more difficult because, tying that plume that, as comes from the Midwest down into the Northeast, could be a little bit hard for attribution. So we will, it's obviously something we're going to look at. It is, as you note, it's very different than CERCLA in the sense of how do you establish liability? You establish it based on the records of their operations there and materials that were, as you know, were transported or stored or generated or disposed of at a site. This is a little different from that piece. But again, I do think that the attribution to that, we do have that data. It's reported data that they have been giving to the government for decades. So we have that data. The big challenge will be establishing what the legal term is the nexus from that company to Maine. So ExxonMobil's easy. Shell is easy. Not so easy if we're going to try and go after Peabody coal to show that it was the coal that they extracted that was burned in the Ohio Valley and was deposited here. That's a little more difficult.
One of the questions in the chat brought up that, Griffin, did you mention shipping? Did you feel that was going to be involved, or did we mishear you?
No, I don't think I mentioned shipping.
Okay. Right. Whoever put that in, did you have a follow-up on that? Does anyone think shipping could be involved? Okay.
Yeah, again, so these don't go after the users, simply just a user of the fuel. We're looking at the people who are extracting, refining, or producing, and putting it into the commerce stream. That's the je ne sais quoi of the law.
Thanks, Sean.
I guess I would also add to that we've tasked our Agency of Natural Resources to make that determination using the carbon majors list, and so that's a part of our process is making those calculations for who is responsible and for how much.
Thank you all. That was really helpful. We got another good question, more Maine related, about the political landscape in Maine for this bill. So a couple of small questions all tied in one, such as, does the governor support it? Is there bipartisan support? Could there be bipartisan support? When could we see bill language for this bill? Happy to open that up to Sean or Griffin if you want to get us started.
I don't know, I haven't been as in the weeds in Maine. Honestly, Jackson, I feel like you might have a good answer to this one, but Sean too.
Yeah.
I will just say though, in the conversations I've had with other people who are like plugged in with the national landscape, it seems like the governor's, hasn't raised any flags against this, and it seems like Maine has a pathway to victory here.
Yeah.
From the polling data I mentioned, it seems like we could make some serious inroads with Republicans. But I'll let Sean go for it.
Well, as somebody like Sue Inches knows, the legislature is a fickle place to be. And I think that unlike Vermont, there hasn't been the campaign that preceded this, which provided a lot of impetus to what the legislature was doing and why there were such big numbers. We're also a year later, and at the time, Vermont had a supermajority, or the Democratic Party had a supermajority in the House. It's much closer in the Maine House right now, and we're at a time where, unfortunately, everything seems to be, with rare exception, breaking down on party lines, even good bills. And so, what does that mean? I think we've got we haven't had language to share with people, but we have had broad discussions with the governor's office, the attorney general's office, leadership in the House and Senate, and obviously members of the legislature. And there is, on a broad level, a lot of support for it. And I would think that we could get something passed even if it was just on party lines. We may be able to get a few Republicans, and I do think that the idea of polluter pays has resonance with folks who can see beyond the Democrat Republican label of the bill. So, I am forever the kid who looks at the room full of horse manure and asks for where the pony is. So, I will remain hopeful that we can do that. I think the biggest challenge, and I said this at the outset, is that there will be a fiscal note applied to this. I'm not sure what it was in Vermont, Senator Watson, but it's going to take some staffing at the Department of Environmental Protection and in the Treasurer's office, and the Attorney General's office can't anticipate being engaged in litigation. So, that's not cheap. That fiscal note could be anywhere between, 600,000 to 2 million, depending on how they want to look at it. And as people in Maine know, it's a very tight budget year for new action because there's already a lot of very good bills and programs that need funding, and we are in a really unstable time when it comes to federal dollars. So that, I think, is the biggest challenge. I would say that if we're able to get it passed through the House and the Senate, it would then go to the appropriations table at the legislature, where it would either get funded and thus come off the table and go to the governor's desk, or it wouldn't get funded. If we were able to pass it through the legislature, but it doesn't get funded, it would get carried over into the next session. So that's, people can do the horse race as to whether or not that's a 50-50, 60-40 chance. I think it's regardless of the chances of getting to be a law this spring, early summer, it's definitely worth making the push now to try and get it through, and if not, to build the support for it.
Thanks for that. I'd love to follow up. It was my question. Is there anything we can do or put into the bill to say that if this is successful, that there could be a payback to the state for the costs involved?
Great idea, Sue Inches. It's in there.
All right, it should be in there.
We actually had tried to appropriate specific funds in it, and the
Yep.
revisor's office didn't like that. So there is a provision that says when it talks about the use of the funds,
Yeah.
that the use of the funds will be to reimburse the general fund
There you go.
costs associated with developing and implementing the program and the fund. So the startup costs, we're saying that's the first check that gets written out of the fund to
Yep.
go back to the general fund.
Great, great. That's good.
But it still doesn't, as you know, that's still a tough climb because that could be 3 or 4 or 5 years before you get that back. So.
Yeah, but that helps, I think.
Thank you. I do just want to be mindful of people's time. It's 7 p.m. now. If you do have to go, that's okay. We just want to thank you for joining us, but we will stick around for another 10 minutes or so to answer some more questions that we haven't gotten to yet.
Jackson, could I just
Sean, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say one thing I'm sure for Senator Watson and others who have been involved in state government or state legislature. When a legislator gets 3 phone calls, they will say the phones are ringing off the hook. People are crazy about this bill. And it's so important to make that phone call to the office of the speaker, to the president of the Senate, to the people on the appropriations. That is the secret sauce to getting this stuff across the line. And I think there's a real opportunity now. People are yearning for opportunity to engage civically. And I think this is a really good one because it is, because polluter pays just makes a lot of sense. So I would just urge people to follow and talk to your legislators and make those phone calls.
Is there like a distribution list or something so that we can know the minute the bill is released from revisers and be sure that we have the information so we can support you?
Right.
Because I feel like I've been a little bit on the dark. I don't know exactly what's going on, but it'd be really great if there was some good communication, or maybe I just don't know where to look. But it'd be good to know.
I agree, and with Sue, and legislators will respond to calls when there's a bill, when there's a printed bill with an LD number. They won't respond so much if you're just calling them about an idea. So I think a lot of people are waiting for the bill to appear to get printed with an LD number. And then I think we can, as we say, flood the phones.
That's exactly right. And if folks sign the petition, you will be getting updates on this bill when folks need to be sending emails and making calls. And I'll have your info at Climate Defenders. We also are going to share that info with Maine conservation voters and the other organizations that are doing the organizing around this bill. So I would say start there. And also, if you really want to get plugged in, I've dropped that Get Involved link in the chat, and we can chat more one-on-one about the best way to plug in and how to stay updated. And I'll drop those links again for folks.
We can also include our contact information, including Griffin's, and the follow-up email we send you tomorrow. Bill, you have a question?
Is this going through the taxation committee?
No, we expect it. It went through judiciary in Vermont. We expect it to go through environment and natural resources. And it's going into and because the Department of Environmental Protection is going to be the principal agency administering it, much in the same way that they're the principal agency administering the state Superfund.
I guess what I'd suggest with Jackson's follow-up, that he puts the name and contact numbers information for the that committee. That could be a tough committee.
Well, the sponsor of the bill, Stacy Brenner, sits on the committee. She was the chair last year. The two chairs, Lori Gramlich and Representative Tepler, are supportive of this. You're right. There are some tough seats there, but again, I think we'll be able to get the majority and hopefully get maybe one or two of the Republicans to join from the committee. That would be a big win.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, in our follow-up email, we can include a link to the Environment and Natural Resources Committee website. So that lists all the committee members. Maybe you have a representative or senator who sits on that committee, and that includes all of their contact information, including email and phone number.
I guess I would be a little bit more aggressive and identify people that are in those person's districts to actually make that contact and not sit inactive waiting for people to make that contact. I think we need to be proactive on this.
I agree.
Absolutely agree with you both. Yeah, and we are starting to do that work at Maine Youth for Climate Justice. We're identifying which of our members live in which districts, who their senators are, who their reps are. So once this bill gets printed, once it gets referenced to committee and scheduled for a hearing, they can start writing their testimony. They can start contacting their legislators and ask them to support this.
I've got to jump. I haven't made the jump from municipal to state office, but I am on the town council here in my town, so I've got to jump.
Would do something for them.
Yeah, I'm going to need to hop off. So thank you so much. So delighted to be chatting with you all about this.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, see you.
Thank you all.
Thank you both. Appreciate it.